Hi, in this one we're going to be talking about loops. First off, congrats on reaching this section and completing all the coding exercises and gaining all the knowledge that you have until now in this course. Trust me, there's so much more to go and so much more to learn so that you can do really cool things with programming. And well, as this course claims, you are never really going to want to have to take a programming course. Rather, you just want to learn different programming languages, but these concepts that you learn here remain the same. Just like all the other concepts you learned, this one is a very important concept and it's called loops. Now, a lot of people think that this concept is very tricky or quite complicated, and for some it might be at first. For me, it was as well. But I'm going to try and teach you in such a way that it's super simple for you to take up, learn, and never forget. So let's just get into it. Now, to understand the concept of loops, we're going to be taking an example. Imagine that you are the owner of a certain company and you have many employees under you. So when you own a company and you have employees, what you want to do is you want to pay their salaries. So you, being a programmer, you write a function, as you see on the screen, to pay their salaries. The name of the function is pay salary, and you want to execute this function every month at the start of the month. And you also want this code to execute every month until the employee works in the company. Obviously, you don't want to pay someone who doesn't work in your company anymore, right? So every month at the start of the month, you want to execute this function, and you want this to happen only if the employee works in your company. So that is your condition. So does the employee still work in the company? If yes, then execute this code. Then you increase the month number, which is you move on to the next month. And the next month, well, you check the same thing. Does the employee still work in the company? If yes, then again, you pay the salary and then increase the month number, and the loop goes on. Now, why do we call these constructs loops in programming? We call them loops because essentially, as you see on your screen, they make kind of a circle. They form a circle, right? And a circle is a form of a loop. It's just like what goes around comes around, right? So these are what loops look like in Python or generally in programming. Let's take a more important example. And as I said at the beginning of this lesson, loops help you automate repetitive tasks in programs. So just as you saw, the pay salary function was something that used to be repeated every single month. So you don't really need to manually do it every month. Instead, what you could do is just automate it using a loop. Now, talking about that example that we spoke about. This example is going to tell us about the four major parts of a loop. Now, pay a lot of attention to this because this is the fundamental of how you're going to actually write a loop or how you're going to understand a loop. Now, the four major parts of a loop are number one, the loop control variable. In this case, our loop control variable is going to be the employee works variable. The loop control variable basically governs or decides how many times does the loop repeat itself. Yeah, the loop control variable governs or decides how many times does a loop repeat itself. Next, we have the looping condition or the loop condition. Now, the loop condition basically usually works with the loop variable, which defines whether the loop needs to go ahead or not. So the looping condition and the loop variable basically together govern how many times the loop actually goes on. Next, the body of the loop. So the body of the loop is basically the code that you want to execute in the loop. In this case, the body of our loop is the pay salary function, right? So we just call the pay salary function in the body of our loop every time it goes back around in a circle. And once the body of the loop is executed, you have your fourth part, which is called the update or the increment and decrement statement. I prefer calling it the update statement simply because it's just shorter. We don't really need to complicate things, right? So the update statement usually increments or increases, or it decrements or decreases the loop control variable or any other variable that your loop might be using to decide whether you still need to loop on or not. In this case, our increment variable would be the month number, because every month you want the number of your month to be increased, right? You cannot pay an employee a salary of January in February. You want to pay it in January, and then you want to pay it in February, right? And in your system, also you want the months to go from 1 to 2. So that's where our increment and decrement statement comes in, or simply our update statement. Now, there are two types of loops in Python. The first type is called the while loop, and the second type is called the for loop. Different programming languages have different kinds of loop. There in Java, there's this loop called the do while loop as well. But since we're not learning Java right now, we'll just stick to Python and stick to the while loop and for loop. And honestly, both of these loops are equally powerful, and they really have many different use cases that we will come across throughout this course in our projects and the questions that we solve. So let's say we want to solve this problem or write this function using the while loop. What's going to happen here is you're going to have a variable called month, which you set to 1 because, well, the month should start from 1, that is January. Then you have your loop control variable, which is employee works, and we're going to set the value of employee works to true, right? So the initial value in this case for the variable or the loop control variable employee works will be true, just as you see on the screen. Next, you write while employee works equals true. So this is your looping condition. While is a keyword. This tells Python that, all right, there's some kind of a loop that's being written. So while condition, and then just like our if-else statements or our functions, we have the colon, and then with the indentation, we have the body of the loop, which is pay salary, and then we are incrementing the month number by 1. So to understand this loop, let's go ahead and actually understand this manually and see how loops work on paper before we code them out. Now this might be a little complicated just to look at, and maybe you haven't understood it properly, but don't worry, you're going to understand it super simply and super fast just as we go through this next section. So I'll see you in the next one.